Claire Brennan had everything. A beautiful home in the Hamptons, a successful architecture career, a loving husband, until the night he pushed her into the pool while she was 7 months pregnant. But that wasn't the worst part. The push was just the beginning of an elaborate plan to steal her fortune, frame her for crimes she didn't commit, and take her baby the moment she gave birth. By the time Claire understood what was happening, she'd already lost everything, or so her husband thought. This is the true story of how one woman fought back from prison, and the shocking discovery that changed everything. If you love stories about justice and survival, hit that like button and subscribe, because this one will keep you on the edge of your seat until the very last word. The crystal chandeliers cast dancing reflections across the pool's surface as Claire Brennan stepped onto the limestone patio. At 7 months pregnant, she moved carefully in her navy dress, one hand instinctively cradling her belly. Behind her, the charity gala hummed with conversation and clinking glasses. 300 guests had gathered at their Hamptons estate to celebrate the Hampton Housing Initiative, her sustainable architecture project that promised affordable homes for working families. Grant materialized beside her, champagne flute in hand, his other arms sliding around her waist. His touch felt possessive rather than protective. But Claire had learned to ignore such thoughts. Marriage meant compromise. Love meant patience. "Ladies and gentlemen," Grant's voice carried across the patio, silencing conversations. "A toast to my brilliant wife. Everything I have, everything I've built, I owe to her vision and talent." Applause rippled through the crowd. Claire smiled, though something in Grant's tone felt off. Too smooth, too rehearsed. She caught sight of Tessa Calloway, Grant's business partner, watching from near the bar. Tessa's red dress matched her lipstick, and her smile held an edge Claire couldn't quite name. Claire designed every building in the Brennan development portfolio. Grant continued. Her genius made it all possible. To Claire, the guests echoed the toast. Claire's head suddenly felt light, the world tilting slightly. She gripped Grant's arm. "I'm dizzy," she whispered. "You're overtired, darling. Let's get you inside." But as Grant guided her toward the house, her foot caught on something. Or did it later? When she replayed the moment in her mind, she'd swear she felt pressure against her lower back. A push, subtle but deliberate. The world spun. Cold water engulfed her, silk dress ballooning around her. She gasped, inhaling chlorine. Panic seized her chest. The baby. She needed to protect the baby. Strong hands grabbed her arms, hauling her upward. She broke the surface, coughing and sputtering. Grant held her, his face a mask of concern. "Someone call 911, he shouted. "It's okay, Claire. I've got you. You're safe." But she wasn't safe. In that moment, as water streamed from her hair and concerned faces blurred above her, Claire felt something she'd never experienced before in her 8-year marriage, fear of her own husband. The paramedics arrived within minutes. They wrapped her in thermal blankets, checked her blood pressure, listened to the baby's heartbeat. Everyone assured her everything would be fine. Grant held her hand in the ambulance, stroking her wet hair, murmuring soothing words. Yet when she closed her eyes, she felt it again. That pressure, that push. At Mercy General Hospital, Dr. Beth Winters performed an ultrasound. The baby's heartbeat filled the room, strong and steady. Claire released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "Everything looks perfect," Dr. Winters said, her kind face crinkling into a smile. "You're both healthy. But Claire, this is your second dizzy spell this month. We need to talk about stress management." "I'll make sure she rests," Grant said from his position by the door. "Can I get her some water from the vending machines?" Down the hall to the left. As soon as Grant left, Dr. Winters' expression shifted. She moved closer, lowering her voice. "Claire, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Do you feel safe at home?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Claire's mind raced. Safe, of course she was safe. Grant was her husband. They were having a baby. They'd built a life together. "I'm fine," she heard herself say. "Just clumsy. Pregnancy brain." Dr. Winters studied her for a long moment, then pulled a card from her pocket. "Keep this anyway, just in case you ever need it." Claire glanced at the card. Suffolk County Domestic Violence Hotline. I don't need this, she said, but she slipped it into her purse anyway. Grant returned with bottled water and his charming smile. The doctor cleared them to go home with instructions for rest and hydration. In the car, Grant held her hand across the center console. You scared me tonight, he said softly. I don't know what I'd do if I lost you. Claire wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe the push had been her imagination, a trick of pregnancy hormones and exhaustion. But as they pulled into their circular driveway, past the perfectly manicured hedges and the pool that glowed like a sapphire in the darkness, she couldn't shake the memory of that moment before the fall. Inside, she headed straight for their bedroom while Grant said he'd lock up. Alone, she opened her laptop. She wasn't sure what she was looking for until her fingers found the keys. She typed, "Signs your husband wants to hurt you." Then, feeling foolish, she deleted it. She closed the laptop and climbed into bed, pulling the covers tight. When Grant finally came upstairs an hour later, she pretended to be asleep. She didn't see him pause in the doorway, phone pressed to his ear, whispering, "It didn't work. We need to wait until after the baby comes." Claire woke alone. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, indicating late morning. She'd slept nearly 12 hours, her body exhausted from the previous night's ordeal. Her phone showed 17 missed calls and 32 text messages, most from concerned gala attendees. One message stood out, sent at 2 in the morning. "Hope you're feeling better. We need to discuss the quarterly reports." Grant. The formality struck her as odd. They lived together. Why text about work at 2 in the morning when he could have simply told her at breakfast? She padded downstairs, expecting to find Grant in his home office. The room was empty. His laptop closed. A yellow sticky note on the kitchen counter read, "Meeting with investors all day. Rest. Love you." The house felt too quiet, too empty. Claire made chamomile tea and returned to bed with her own laptop. She'd review the Hampton Housing Initiative budget while she rested, make sure everything was ready for the city council presentation next week. She logged into their joint banking account to check recent transactions. The page loaded slowly, and when it finally appeared, her teacup nearly slipped from her hands. Balance $214.67. That couldn't be right. 3 days ago, the account held $847,000. Years of savings, investment returns, her inheritance from her grandmother. With trembling fingers, she clicked on transaction history. Withdrawal after withdrawal, each one approved with her digital signature. Except she'd never authorized any of them. $50,000 to Cayman Islands Bank, $100,000 to Swiss Investment Holdings, $200,000 to Offshore Trust Management. She checked her business account next. Brennan Architecture, the firm she'd built from nothing over 10 years. Empty, completely drained. Her investment portfolio? Gone. Her retirement accounts? Liquidated. Every penny she'd ever earned, saved, or inherited had vanished overnight. Claire's hands shook so violently she had to set the laptop aside. She grabbed her phone and called their financial advisor. Margaret Chen. No, wait. Margaret Chen was Asian. This story needed authentic American names only. She called their financial advisor, Margaret Sullivan. "Margaret, this is Claire Brennan. Something's wrong with our accounts." A pause. "Oh, Claire, I'm not supposed to discuss this with you." "What do you mean they're my accounts?" "Not according to the court order Grant filed yesterday. He's claimed financial power of attorney due to your mental incompetence." The words hit like physical blows. "My what?" "Claire, I'm sorry, he has documentation from a psychiatrist stating you've been experiencing severe postpartum psychosis that began early in your pregnancy. The judge granted him emergency financial control to prevent you from harming yourself or others through reckless spending." "I've never seen a psychiatrist, Margaret. This is insane. The documentation looks legitimate. Dr. Harrison Murphy signed off on everything." Claire knew no Dr. Harrison Murphy. She'd never been evaluated for anything beyond standard prenatal checkups. "Where did the money go?" "I can't tell you that. I'm sorry, Claire. My hands are tied." The call ended. Claire stared at her phone, mind reeling. This wasn't random theft. This was calculated, methodical destruction. Grant had planned this, had forged documents, had manipulated the legal system. She opened her laptop again and checked her design patents. The architectural designs that had won awards, that had defined sustainable luxury housing, that had made Brennan Development millions, all transferred to Grant's name, filed 6 weeks ago with her forged signature. Her phone rang. Her attorney, Robert A. Davidson. Claire, why didn't you tell me you were having mental health issues? Robert, I'm not. Grant is lying. He's filed for emergency custody of your unborn child. He's claiming you're a danger to yourself and the baby. He has psychiatric evaluations, financial records showing erratic behavior, witness statements from your staff about emotional outbursts. None of that is true. There's more. He's filed a restraining order claiming you've been threatening him. The hearing is tomorrow at 9 in the morning. Claire, you need to prepare yourself. With this much documentation, the judge will likely grant temporary custody. The room spun. Claire gripped the edge of the bed, fighting nausea. He's going to take my baby. Get character witnesses. Anyone who can testify to your stability. She ended the call and immediately dialed Wade Hartley, her former mentor. Wade had known her since she was 23, fresh out of graduate school. He'd taught her everything about sustainable design, had celebrated every achievement, had attended her wedding. Wade, I need your help. Claire, his voice sounded strained. I heard about your episode at the gala. It wasn't an episode. Grant pushed me into the pool, and now he's stealing everything, claiming I'm crazy. Will you testify for me? Tell the court I'm competent. Silence stretched across the line. Finally, Claire, I can't get involved in your domestic issues. I have my reputation to consider. Wade, please. You've known me for 9 years. I'm sorry, I truly am. But Grant showed me the psychiatric evaluations. You need help, not court battles. Get treatment, then we'll talk. The call ended. Claire sat in her $1 million bedroom, in the house she'd designed, pregnant with a child she might never raise, and finally understood the full scope of Grant's plan. He hadn't pushed her into the pool to kill her. He'd pushed her to create a narrative. Claire is unstable. Claire is dangerous. Claire can't be trusted. And everyone believed him. Claire spent the evening gathering evidence. She found emails she'd sent about design projects, proving her competence and clarity of thought. She printed bank statements from 2 months ago showing stable account management. She compiled awards, testimonials from clients, photographs of completed projects. By midnight, she had 3 binders full of documentation. She'd represent herself if necessary. She'd prove to any judge that she was perfectly sane, that Grant was the danger. She slept fitfully, waking every hour to check her phone. No messages from Grant. He hadn't come home. At 6 in the morning, she showered and dressed in a gray suit that accommodated her belly. Professional, competent, stable. The doorbell rang at 7:15. Detective Jonas Reed stood on her doorstep, his weathered face apologetic. Behind him, 2 uniformed officers waited by their patrol car. Mrs. Brennan, I need you to come with us. I have a court hearing at 9. Whatever this is, can it wait? No, ma'am, it can't. You're under arrest for embezzlement and wire fraud. The words didn't make sense. Excuse me, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. There's been a mistake. I haven't embezzled anything. You transferred $847,000 from Brennan Development accounts to offshore holdings. Your husband filed charges yesterday. Those were my personal accounts, money I earned. According to corporate records, the funds belonged to Brennan Development LLC, a company wholly owned by Grant Brennan. You were an employee with no ownership stake. Claire's legs nearly gave out. That's not true. I founded that company. I designed every building. Ma'am, I need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back. The handcuffs clicked cold against her wrists. The neighbors were watching now, curtains twitching, phones recording. Mrs. Peterson, from 3 doors down, stood on her lawn in her bathrobe, mouth open. At the station, they processed her like any criminal. Fingerprints, photographs, inventory of personal effects. They placed her in a holding cell that smelled of disinfectant and despair. Hours passed. Finally, a public defender appeared, a tired-looking woman named Rachel Morrison, who carried 3 overstuffed file folders. "I have 12 minutes," Rachel said, sitting across from Claire in the interview room. "The evidence against you is substantial. Emails authorizing transfers, your digital signature on documents, video footage of you accessing the accounts. All forged. My husband is framing me." Rachel sighed. "Every defendant claims they're being framed. The district attorney has offered a deal. Plead guilty to reduced charges, serve 18 months, full restitution. Given your pregnancy, you'd likely serve 6 months and the rest under house arrest." "I won't plead guilty to something I didn't do." "Then you're looking at 15 years in federal prison. Your baby will be born while you're in custody. The state will place the child with family. In this case, that means your husband." The trap was perfect. Plead guilty and lose 18 months with her child. Fight and lose everything, possibly forever. "I need a real lawyer, someone who can investigate this properly." "Mrs. Brennan, you have no money? Your accounts are frozen as evidence. No lawyer will take this case pro bono. It's too complex, too time-consuming." "Then what do I do?" Rachel closed her folders. "Accept reality. Your husband has resources and documentation. You have nothing. Take the deal." They returned Claire to the holding cell. Bail was set at $500,000, an amount she couldn't access even if her accounts hadn't been frozen. She'd remain in custody until trial. That night, lying on a thin mattress that reeked of bleach, Claire felt her daughter kick. Strong, insistent movements that said, "I'm here. I'm alive. I need you." "I'm sorry, Claire whispered, hands on her belly. "I'm so sorry." The next morning, Detective Reed appeared at her cell door. "You made bail. How I don't have money. Someone posted it anonymously through a bonding company. You're being released with an ankle monitor. You're confined to your home address except for medical appointments and court dates." 20 minutes later, Claire stood outside the police station, an electronic shackle around her ankle. A black town car waited at the curb. The driver handed her an envelope containing a key and a note written in elegant script. "You're not alone. Keep fighting." No signature, no return address. The car drove her home, where crime scene tape still stretched across the door. Inside, the house had been searched. Her office ransacked, her laptop seized, her carefully prepared binders scattered across the floor. She turned on the television and immediately wished she hadn't. Her mugshot filled the screen beneath the headline, "Pregnant Architect Embezzles Nearly $1 million from Husband's Company." The news anchor's voice dripped with disdain. Claire Brennan, 32, was arrested yesterday for stealing from Brennan Development, the company founded by her husband Grant. Sources say Brennan has a history of mental instability and that her husband had been trying to get her help for months. The case has shocked the Hampton community, where the Brennans were known for their charitable work. The segment cut to an interview with Grant, filmed outside their home. He looked devastated, a grieving husband wronged by his wife's betrayal. "I love Claire," he said, voice breaking. "I wanted to protect her, to keep this private. But when she started stealing from the company, from our employees' retirement funds, I had no choice. Those people depend on us. I had to do the right thing." The interviewer leaned in sympathetically. "There are rumors about your wife's mental health. Claire has been struggling since becoming pregnant. I've tried to get her help, but she refused treatment. I never imagined it would come to this. What happens to your unborn child? I'll do whatever the court says is best for the baby. That's all that matters now." Claire turned off the television. Grant's performance was flawless. Heartbroken husband, responsible father, betrayed partner. The public would crucify her. Already, her phone buzzed with messages, death threats, accusations, former clients demanding refunds. Her reputation, built over a decade of brilliant work, lay in ruins. She dragged herself upstairs and collapsed on the bed. The ankle monitor beeped, a constant reminder of her imprisonment. Outside, reporters gathered at the gate, cameras trained on her windows. Her daughter kicked again. Claire placed both hands on her belly. "I don't know how to fight this," she whispered. "I don't know how to save us." The baby kicked harder, as if to say, "Figure it out." Dr. Beth Winters appeared at Claire's door 3 days later. black medical bag in hand. The ankle monitor company had reported Claire hadn't left the house, hadn't attended a required check-in with the monitoring service. Winters claimed she was making a house call to check on the pregnancy. "You don't make house calls," Claire said, letting her inside anyway. "I do when I'm worried about a patient." Winters set her bag on the kitchen counter and pulled out a blood pressure cuff. "When was the last time you ate?" Claire couldn't remember. Time had become fluid, days blending together. "I'm not hungry. The baby needs nutrition. You need strength." Winters measured her blood pressure, checked her pulse, listened to the baby's heartbeat. All normal, which seemed impossible when Claire's entire world had collapsed. "Claire, I need to tell you something. But first, you need to promise me you'll stay calm." "I'm past calm. Tell me." Dr. Paul Winters pulled a folder from her bag. "Not a medical file. Something else. 5 years ago, I had a patient named Jessica Brennan. She was 7 months pregnant. Just like you. Her husband's name was Grant Brennan." The words took a moment to register. When they did, Claire felt the floor tilt. "Grant was married before. He never told you." "He said he'd had relationships, but never anything serious. No marriages." Winters opened the folder. Inside were medical records, photographs, incident reports. "Jessica came to me with bruises she claimed came from falls, dizzy spells, memory lapses. Her husband was attentive, concerned, always present at her appointments. The pattern was familiar, horrifyingly familiar. What happened to her?" "She gave birth to a healthy daughter. 3 months later, Jessica committed suicide, drove her car off a bridge into the Sound." Winters pulled out a newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local woman dies in tragic accident. Postpartum depression suspected." Claire stared at the photograph. Jessica had been beautiful, with dark hair and a gentle smile. In the picture, she held her newborn daughter. But her eyes looked empty, dead already. "I never believed it was suicide." Winters continued. "Jessica's family tried to fight for custody of the baby, but Grant had documented her mental illness thoroughly. He won full custody. Jessica's parents haven't seen their granddaughter in years." "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I kept Jessica's real medical records, the ones that tell a different story." Dr. Winters pulled out more documents. Evidence of systematic poisoning, small doses of prescription medication that would cause dizziness, confusion, memory loss. Nothing fatal, just enough to make her appear unstable. "I reported my suspicions to the police, but they found no evidence. Grant's lawyers destroyed my credibility. I was investigated for falsifying records. Nearly lost my license." "So you stayed quiet." "Until now, Claire, I won't watch another woman die. I won't let him take another baby." Winters pushed the entire folder across the table. "This is everything. Jessica's real records, toxicology reports I had run privately, photographs of injuries that don't match her explanations. It's enough to establish a pattern." Claire leafed through the documents. Her hands shook. Why didn't his second marriage show up in any background checks? He had it expunged, claimed the marriage was annulled before Jessica's death, filed paperwork saying they'd never legally married, that she'd used his name without permission. His lawyers are very good. What happened to the daughter? Grace. She's 12 now, living with Grant and being raised by nannies. I see her occasionally for checkups. She's a sad child, quiet, scared. Claire thought of her own daughter, still safe in her, and felt a fierce protective rage build in her chest. I need a lawyer who'll fight with it as evidence. I made some calls. There's a woman named Maya Torres. She specializes in domestic abuse cases, takes some pro bono work. I told her about you. She's willing to meet. For the first time in days, Claire felt a flicker of hope. Tomorrow, 2 in the afternoon, I'll drive you. Make sure the monitoring company approves a medical exception. After Dr. Winters left, Claire studied Jessica's file for hours. She found patterns that mirrored her own experience. The slow isolation from friends and family, the gradual transfer of financial assets, the creation of a paper trail suggesting mental instability. Grant had done this before. He'd perfected it. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Stop digging into things that don't concern you. Think about your baby's safety. Claire took a screenshot and added it to her growing evidence folder. That night, she barely slept. Every creak of the house settling made her jump. The ankle monitor beeped its hourly check-in, reminding her she was trapped. Around 3 in the morning, she heard a car door slam outside, footsteps on gravel. Grant appeared in the bedroom doorway. She hadn't heard him unlock the front door, hadn't heard him climb the stairs. He stood silhouetted against the hallway light, his expression unreadable. "You should be resting," he said. "What are you doing here?" "I still own this house. I have every right to be here." He stepped into the room, and Claire instinctively pressed herself against the headboard. Grant noticed the gesture and smiled. "Are you afraid of me, Claire? You've taken everything from me. You framed me for crimes I didn't commit. What do you want now?" "I want you to understand something." He sat on the edge of the bed, too close. Claire couldn't retreat further. "You were always the talent. I was always the businessman. But talent without business sense is just a hobby. I made you successful. I made you rich. I made you matter. I made myself matter. Those designs were mine, and now they're mine. The patents, the copyrights, the intellectual property. All legally transferred, all perfectly documented. You can't touch them. Why are you doing this?" Grant's smile widened. "Because I can. Because you stopped being useful. Because Tessa is younger, sharper, and doesn't question my decisions." He leaned closer, his breath warm on her face. "You should have been grateful. Claire, I gave you everything, but you always thought you deserved it on your own merit. That was your mistake. Get out of my room. It's my room, my house, my life you're living." He stood. "Enjoy it while you can. After the baby comes, you'll have nothing. Not even her." He left as quietly as he'd arrived. Claire sat frozen, her heart hammering. She grabbed her phone and texted Dr. Winters. "He was here in my bedroom, threatening me." The response came immediately. "Document everything. We fight tomorrow." But morning brought disaster instead of hope. Maya Torres arrived at Claire's house at exactly 2 in the afternoon, right on schedule. She was younger than Claire expected, perhaps 35, with sharp eyes and an efficient manner. She set up her laptop on the dining room table and listened to Claire's story without interrupting. When Claire finished, Maya opened Jessica's file and studied it for 20 minutes in silence. Finally, she looked up. "This is good. This establishes pattern and premeditation. With Dr. Winter's testimony and these medical records, we can build a defense that shows Grant's history of abuse. It won't get the criminal charges dismissed immediately, but it creates reasonable doubt. More importantly, it destroys his custody claim. Can you take my case?" "Pro bono, yes. I'll need to file motions immediately. We have a preliminary hearing in 2 days. I'll argue for dismissal of charges based on new evidence, and I'll file for an emergency protective order against Grant." Relief flooded through Claire. Finally, someone believed her. Someone would fight for her. Maya spent 3 hours photographing documents, taking Claire's statement, building a case strategy. When she left, she squeezed Claire's shoulder. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we start turning this around." That night, Claire slept better than she had in weeks. She dreamed of holding her daughter, of designing a new house somewhere far from Hampton, of starting over. She woke to her phone ringing. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Mrs. Brennan, this is Amanda Phillips from the New York State Bar Association. I'm calling about Maya Torres." Claire sat up. "Is something wrong?" "Ms. Torres has been disbarred effective immediately. She's been found guilty of ethics violations, including falsifying evidence and witness tampering in a previous case. She's no longer licensed to practice law in any state." "That's impossible. I just saw her yesterday." The complaint was filed 3 weeks ago by Tessa Calloway, Esquire. The Ethics Board completed an emergency investigation. "The evidence against Miss Torres is substantial. I'm sorry, but any legal representation she provided you is now void. You'll need to find new counsel." The call ended. Claire dialed Maya's number. It rang once, then went to a generic voicemail. She tried again. Same result. She called Dr. Winters. "Maya Torres was disbarred. Did you know What? No, that's impossible, mine. I vetted her thoroughly. Tessa Calloway filed the complaint 3 weeks ago, right after you first contacted Maya. They both fell silent, understanding settling between them like ice. Grant and Tessa had been watching, planning, anticipating every move. They'd known Dr. Winters would seek legal help for Claire. They'd destroyed that help before it could be used. I have other contacts, Dr. Winters said. Other lawyers, who Grant will destroy the same way. Don't you see we can't win? He's 10 steps ahead. Claire ended the call and sat in the empty house, the ankle monitor beeping its reminder that she was a prisoner. Her preliminary hearing was in 2 days, and she had no lawyer. The charges would stand. The custody case would proceed. Grant would win everything. Her phone buzzed. A news alert. Breaking ethics violations, Rockhampton legal community. Prominent defense attorney Maya Torres disbarred for evidence tampering. The article painted Maya as corrupt, greedy, willing to falsify documents to win cases. It mentioned Claire's case specifically, suggesting that Maya had been planning to manufacture evidence to defend an obviously guilty woman. The comments section filled with vitriol, directed at Claire. She was the criminal who'd corrupted a good lawyer. She'd destroyed Maya's career with her lies. By evening, reporters had returned to her gate. Cameras flashed through the windows. Someone threw a rock that shattered the kitchen window. The ankle monitor company called to remind her that leaving the property would result in immediate arrest. Grant sent a text. You tried to cheat the system. That was foolish. Just plead guilty. Claire, make this easier on everyone. She didn't respond. Instead, she went upstairs to the nursery she'd designed 6 months ago. Soft yellow walls, a crib she'd assembled herself, stuffed animals arranged on shelves, everything ready for a baby who might never sleep here. Claire sat in the rocking chair and placed her hands on her belly. Her daughter was quiet tonight, maybe sleeping, maybe tired of fighting. I don't know what to do, Claire whispered. I don't know how to beat him. The baby kicked once, hard, as if to say, keep trying. But Claire was out of options. No money, no lawyer, no allies except Dr. Winters, who'd already risked her career once and couldn't afford to do it again. The preliminary hearing would proceed without representation. The judge would see a pregnant criminal, backed by evidence and documentation. With no defense, she'd lose everything in 2 days. That night, Claire drafted a statement for the court. Without a lawyer to advise her, she wrote from her heart. She explained about Jessica, about the medical records, about Grant's pattern of abuse. She printed it out, hoping a judge might at least read it. At midnight, Detective Reed called. Mrs. Brennan, I need you to come to the station tomorrow morning at 8. I have an ankle monitor. I can't leave except for court and medical appointments. We're investigating a new case. Your presence is required. We're sending a car. What case? Jessica Brennan's death has been reopened. You're now a person of interest. Those words made no sense. Jessica died 5 years before I met Grant. New evidence suggests otherwise. We'll discuss it tomorrow. The call ended. Claire sat frozen, her statement still warm from the printer. They were framing her for Jessica's death now. Of course they were. Grant had to make sure she looked not just unstable, but dangerous, murderous. By morning, the news had broken. Wife of developer investigated in cold case murder. The story claimed Claire had known Grant during his first marriage, had been his mistress, had potentially poisoned Jessica to clear the way for her own relationship with Grant. Unnamed sources provided evidence photographs of Claire and Grant together that predated their official meeting. Though Claire knew the photos were doctored, more photographs showed Claire near the bridge where Jessica died, dated the day of her death. Claire had never been to that bridge, had never even heard of it until yesterday. The frame was perfect, complex, unshakable. At the police station, Detective Reed showed her the evidence. It was overwhelming. False, but overwhelming. Claire's denial sounded exactly like what a guilty person would say. I'm recommending you be held without bail pending investigation. Reed said, well, you're a flight risk and a danger to others. I'm 8 months pregnant. The baby will be born in custody. Child Protective Services will take temporary custody until this is resolved. Claire's world narrowed to a single point of horror. They were going to take her baby at birth. Grant would gain custody. The baby would grow up like Grace, scared and controlled. She'd never even get to hold her daughter. They transferred Claire to the women's detention center that afternoon. The ankle monitor was removed, replaced by prison scrubs and a wristband with her inmate number. Her cell held a metal cot, a toilet, and a small window with bars that looked out onto nothing. Dr. Winters was allowed to visit, to provide continued prenatal care. She came twice a week, her face drawn with guilt and helplessness. "I'm so sorry," she said during her third visit. "This is my fault. I gave you false hope. You gave me the truth about Jessica. That matters. The truth doesn't help if you're in prison." Claire had gained clarity in confinement, without the constant assault of news coverage and social media hatred, without the fear of Grant appearing at her bedroom door. She could think. She spent hours reviewing everything in her mind, looking for cracks in his plan. There had to be something he'd missed, some oversight, some thread that, when pulled, would unravel everything. 2 weeks before her due date, during Dr. Winters' visit, Claire asked, "What happened to Grace, Jessica's daughter?" "Grant has full custody. She lives in the Hampton house with him." "And Tessa?" "She moved in 6 months ago. They're not hiding the relationship anymore. With you in prison, there's no reason to pretend." "So Tessa is raising Grace?" "Technically, yes, though the nannies do most of the actual parenting." An idea flickered. Dangerous. Desperate. But it was something. "Grace is 12. Old enough to testify in court." Winter's eyes widened. "You want to use a traumatized child as a witness? I want to give her a voice. If she's lived with Grant all these years, she knows what he's really like. Kids see things adults miss. Even if she'd testify, which is unlikely, Grant would never allow it. He's her legal guardian. Can you get a message to her?" Dr. Winters was quiet for a long time. "I could, through her school nurse, maybe. But Claire, she's 12. She can't save you." "She doesn't need to save me. She just needs to tell the truth." 3 days later, Dr. Winters returned with news. "I spoke to the school nurse. Grace is struggling. Her grades have dropped. She's seeing the counselor twice a week for anxiety. When the nurse mentioned your case, Grace asked questions. She wanted to know if you were like her mother." "What did the nurse say?" "That she couldn't discuss it. But Grace said something strange. She said, 'He does this every time. Finds someone new and makes the old one disappear.'" Dr. Winters leaned closer. "Claire, I think Grace has seen this pattern her whole life. Different women coming and going, all of them ending badly. Then she knows. She understands what he is. Understanding doesn't equal testimony. She's a child living under his control." But the seed was planted. Claire had something Grant couldn't anticipate, a witness he thought he controlled. 2 days later, Claire went into labor. The contractions started at dawn, mild at first, then building in intensity. The prison guards called Dr. Winters, who arranged for Claire to be transported to Mercy General under guard. They shackled her ankles during the ambulance ride, despite her protests. At the hospital, they removed the shackles but posted 2 guards outside her delivery room. Dr. Winters stayed by her side, coaching her through contractions, holding her hand when the pain became overwhelming. "You're doing beautifully," Winters said, strong and steady. But the real torture came when Grant and Tessa arrived. They appeared in the doorway during active labor. When Claire was too exhausted to do more than glare at them, Grant looked calm, collected, like a father awaiting his child's birth. Tessa wore a cream-colored suit, playing the role of supportive stepmother. "I want them out," Claire gasped between contractions. "They have a court order," the nurse said apologetically. "Father's right to be present at birth." So Claire labored under Grant's watchful eyes. He stood by the window, arms crossed, occasionally checking his phone. Tessa sat in the corner, reviewing documents in a leather folder. They were waiting to take her baby. "Final push," Dr. Winters said. "Come on, Claire, bring her home." Claire pushed with every ounce of strength she possessed. The room filled with sound, and then another sound joined it. A baby crying, strong, healthy, furious at being thrust into the world. "It's a girl," Dr. Winters said, tears streaming down her face. "She's perfect." They placed the baby on Claire's chest for 8 minutes. Claire counted every second. She memorized her daughter's face, the curve of her cheek, the tiny fingers that gripped Claire's thumb with surprising strength. "I love you," Claire whispered. "I love you more than anything. I'm going to fix this. I promise." Then the social worker arrived with the court order. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Brennan. We have to take her now." "No, please. Just a few more minutes." "I'm sorry." They lifted the baby from Claire's arms. Her daughter's cries intensified, as if she knew she was being separated from her mother. Claire tried to sit up, to reach for her bond, but the exhaustion and medication kept her pinned to the bed. Grant stepped forward. "I'll take her." The social worker hesitated. "Sir, the order places the child in state custody pending investigation." "I'm her father. I have full custody rights." The social worker looked at her supervisor, who nodded. They placed Claire's daughter in Grant's arms. He looked down at the baby with an expression Claire couldn't read. Not love, not joy, satisfaction, maybe victory. "What's her name?" the nurse asked. Claire had chosen a name months ago. "Lily." "No," Grant said. "Her name is Grace. Grace Brennan Jr., after her sister." He turned and walked out, carrying Claire's daughter. Tessa followed, already on her phone, probably calling nannies, arranging nurseries, planning a life that didn't include Claire. The door closed. Claire lay in the hospital bed, her body empty, her arms aching, her heart shattered into pieces so small she didn't know if they could ever be reassembled. Dr. Winters sat beside her, holding her hand, crying silently. "I failed," Claire whispered. "No, you survived. That's not failure." But it felt like failure. It felt like death. They returned Claire to the detention center the next day. The prison had a small medical wing where she could recover from delivery, but recovery felt impossible when her breasts ached with milk her daughter would never drink, when every cell in her body screamed for the child who wasn't there. Dr. Winters visited daily, bringing medical care and updates. Grant had hired round-the-clock nannies. The baby, legally named Grace, was healthy and gaining weight. Claire wasn't allowed contact, not even photographs. "How is the older Grace?" Claire asked during one visit. "I haven't seen her." Grant pulled her from her regular school, enrolled her in a private academy that doesn't require annual checkups. "I have no reason to visit." Another door closed. Another hope extinguished. Claire's criminal trial was scheduled for 6 weeks after the birth. Her public defender, a new one since Rachel had recused herself, recommended pleading guilty. The evidence was overwhelming. The case was unwinnable. A guilty plea might result in 15 years instead of 30. "What happens to my daughter if I'm in prison for 15 years? The defender, a man named Thomas Wright, shrugged. "She grows up with her father. When you're released, you can apply for visitation rights." 15 years. Her daughter would be 15 years old, nearly grown, shaped entirely by Grant's influence. She wouldn't remember Claire, wouldn't know her mother had fought for her. Claire stopped eating, stopped sleeping. The prison psychiatrist visited, offering medication for depression. Claire refused. She didn't want numbness. She wanted to feel everything, to remember why she couldn't give up. 2 weeks before trial, during Dr. Winters' visit, the door to the medical wing opened unexpectedly. A guard appeared with a visitor. Nora Brennan. Grant's mother was 70 but looked younger. Her silver hair elegant, her posture regale. Claire hadn't seen her mother-in-law since the pool incident. Nora had sent flowers to the hospital after the birth, but no note. "Leave us," Nora said to Dr. Winters. Dr. Winters looked at Claire, who nodded. When they were alone, Nora sat in the plastic chair beside Claire's bed. For a long moment, she simply looked at her daughter-in-law. "You look terrible," Nora finally said. "Your son stole my baby, framed me for multiple felonies. What did you expect?" "I expected rage, denial, threats." Nora pulled an envelope from her purse. "Not this quiet acceptance." "I'm not accepting anything. I'm gathering strength." Nora studied her, then opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph of both Grace's children. The older one, 12 years old with Jessica's dark hair, held the baby awkwardly, as if she'd been told to pose but didn't want to. Neither child smiled. "That's Grace holding your daughter," Nora said. "My granddaughters, both of them damaged by my son." Claire took the photograph, her hands trembling. Her daughter was beautiful. 6 weeks old, with Claire's nose and Grant's coloring. Why are you showing me this? Because I found something. Nora pulled out a journal, old leather bound. Jessica's diary. I was cleaning the attic, found it tucked behind some boxes. Grant must have missed it when he destroyed her things. Claire's heart began to pound. What does it say? Everything. The financial manipulation, the gaslighting, the systematic poisoning. She documented it all, dated every entry, recorded every instance of abuse. Nora's voice cracked. She wrote about being afraid to sleep because she might not wake up. She wrote about wanting to run but having nowhere to go because he'd isolated her from everyone. On the last page, she wrote, if something happens to me, if I know that I didn't choose it, he did. Then it wasn't suicide. No, it was murder. And I've known that possibility for 5 years. But I told myself I was wrong. He's my son, my only child. I couldn't believe it. His tears streamed down Nora's face. But watching him do the same thing to you, watching him take your baby the way he took Jessica's, I can't stay silent anymore. She pulled out more items from her purse, a USB drive, a stack of papers, audio recordings. I've been recording Grant and Tessa for 3 weeks. Every conversation in the house, every phone call. They talk openly because they think I'm just a foolish old woman who believes her son is perfect. Nora pushed everything across the table. They're planning to sell your designs to a Chinese development company for $30 million. They've been negotiating for months. They needed you out of the way to complete the deal. That's what this has all been about. Not custody, not love, money. Claire stared at the evidence. Why now? Why help me now? Because yesterday, I heard Grant talking to Tessa about what they'd do when the baby gets older. How they'd need to manage her the way they managed Grace. Keep her compliant. Controllable. Useful. Nora's hands shook. I won't let him destroy 3 generations. I won't let him turn those children into his image. If you testify, he'll know you betrayed him. I'm 70 years old. I've already made my peace with losing my son. I'd rather lose him than lose my soul. Nora stood. I've given this same evidence to Detective Reed. He's reopening Jessica's death investigation with new information. He's reviewing your case. It won't be instant, but it's the beginning. Grant will fight back. He'll claim you're senile. Let him try. I've had myself evaluated by 3 independent psychiatrists this week. All found me completely competent. My lawyer has prepared all the documentation. She moved toward the door, then paused. Claire, I'm sorry. I should have protected Jessica. I should have protected you. I'm trying to protect my granddaughters now. After Nora left, Winters returned. Claire showed her everything. The journal, the recordings, the documents. This changes everything, Dr. Winters whispered. That night, Detective Reed visited the detention center. He listened to the recordings with headphones, his expression darkening with each minute. When he finished, he looked at Claire with something new in his eye and belief. Mrs. Brennan, I'm recommending your case be reviewed immediately by the district attorney. This evidence suggests systematic fraud and conspiracy. If verified, the charges against you will be dropped. How long will that take? In normal circumstances, months. But this isn't normal. Grant Brennan is about to close a $30 million deal using stolen intellectual property. If we move fast, we can stop it and arrest him simultaneously. What about my daughter? Emergency custody will be granted to Nora Brennan pending full investigation. You'll be released on your own recognizance and allowed supervised visitation. Claire couldn't breathe. After months of suffocating darkness, a crack of light appeared. Windius, 48 hours, if everything checks out. 2 days felt like eternity, but Claire had learned patience through suffering. She spent the time working with Dr. Winters, preparing statements, organizing evidence. 48 hours later, the cell door opened. Mrs. Brennan, you're free to go. Claire walked out of the detention center into autumn sunshine. Dr. De Winters waited with her car, along with Nora Brennan. They drove directly to Nora's estate, where both Grace's children waited. The 12-year-old hung back, uncertain. But when Claire appeared, she stepped forward. "You're Claire, my mother's friend." Claire knelt to be at eye level. "Your mother and I never met, but I wish we had. She was brave and strong, and you should be proud of her." "Did my father kill her?" The question deserved honesty. "I think so, but we're going to find out the truth. Together." The baby, carried by a nanny, stirred at the sound of Claire's voice. Some primal recognition. Claire held out her arms, and the nanny placed her daughter against her chest. "Hi, Lily," Claire whispered. Her daughter's eyes opened, focused on her face. Recognition, connection, love. Claire wept. Dr. Winters wept. Even Nora wiped away tears. But there was no time for prolonged reunion. Detective Reed had obtained warrants. That evening, simultaneous raids occurred at Brennan Development Headquarters, Grant's home, and Tessa's law office. They found everything: the fraudulent documents, the offshore accounts, the communication with the Chinese company, evidence of Jessica's murder, including the medication Grant had used to poison her, purchased under a false name but traceable through credit cards. Grant and Tessa were arrested at a restaurant where they were celebrating the impending deal. News footage showed them both in handcuffs, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. Grant's expression was one Claire had never seen before: fear. The media reversal was swift and brutal. Architect framed by husband's elaborate scheme. Real estate developer charged with murder of first wife. Financial fraud ring exposed. Claire's mugshot disappeared from websites, replaced by photos of Grant looking disheveled and defeated. Public opinion shifted overnight. She was the victim. He was the monster. Her criminal charges were dismissed with prejudice. The district attorney issued a public apology. Thomas Wright, her public defender, visited to congratulate her on the outcome, conveniently forgetting he'd advised her to plead guilty. Wade Hartley called, full of apologies and offers to testify on her behalf in civil proceedings. Claire thanked him politely and ended the call. Some bridges, once burned, weren't worth rebuilding. The custody hearing took 3 days. Grant's lawyers tried to argue that Nora had coerced the evidence, that the recordings were inadmissible, that Grant's rights as a father superseded everything. But the judge, Maureen Gallagher, listened to Jessica's journal entries read aloud in court. She watched the older Grace testify about years of emotional abuse and manipulation. She reviewed medical records showing the systematic poisoning. "Mr. Brennan," Judge Gallagher said, "you are a danger to your children and to society. Custody of both minor children is hereby granted to their maternal grandmother, Nora Brennan, with full visitation rights for Claire Brennan as the mother of the infant. Your parental rights are terminated pending criminal trial." Grant exploded. He lunged toward the judge's bench, screaming threats, accusations, denials. Security tackled him to the floor. They dragged him from the courtroom, still shouting. Tessa Calloway faced disbarment and criminal charges. Her law license was suspended immediately. She'd cooperated with prosecutors, providing testimony against Grant in exchange for a reduced sentence. She'd serve 5 to 7 years instead of 20. The Chinese development deal collapsed. The company filed a lawsuit against Brennan Development for fraud. Other clients followed. Within 2 weeks, Brennan Development filed for bankruptcy. Claire's attorneys filed civil suits to recover her stolen assets. The offshore accounts were frozen and traced, slowly, painfully. Her money began to return. But money wasn't what mattered. What mattered was 3 weeks after her release, when she held Lily on the floor of Nora's living room while 12-year-old Grace cautiously approached. "Can I hold her?" Grace asked. "Of course, go on." Claire showed Grace how to support the baby's head, how to cradle her. Grace held her baby sister with exquisite care, and for the first time since Claire had met her, Grace smiled. "She's beautiful," Grace whispered. "So are you." 3 months later, the criminal trial began. It lasted 8 weeks. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence: Jessica's journal, medical records, financial documents, recordings of Grant and Tessa plotting. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Grant Brennan was sentenced to 25 years for financial fraud, conspiracy, involuntary manslaughter in Jessica's death. With good behavior, he might be released when he was 60 years old. His daughters would be grown. His empire would be dust. Tessa Calloway received her 7-year sentence. She'd be eligible for parole in 5. Claire attended every day of the trial. She wanted Grant to see her, healthy and strong, holding their daughter. She wanted him to know he'd failed. On the final day, as they led him away in shackles, Grant looked at her across the courtroom. His expression held no remorse, only rage that he'd been caught. Claire felt nothing, no satisfaction, no vindication, just relief that it was over. Claire used the recovered funds to buy a modest house in Connecticut, far from Hampton and its memories. The house had a studio where she could design, a yard where Lily could eventually play, and a spare bedroom for Grace on the weekends when she visited. Nora retained primary custody of Grace, but the girl spent increasing time with Claire. It was slow, cautious. Grace had been damaged by years of Grant's manipulation. She struggled with trust, with expressing emotion, with believing she was safe. But children were resilient. With therapy, patience, and love, Grace began to heal. 6 months after the trial, Claire received a call from Wade Hartley. "I know I don't deserve your time," he began, "but I wanted you to know that I'm stepping down from the board of the American Institute of Architects. I'm recommending you for the position." "Why, Bo?" "Because I was a coward when you needed an ally. This doesn't erase that, but maybe it's a start toward making things right." Claire considered. The board position would restore her reputation, give her influence over the field she loved. But it would also mean working with Wade again, maintaining a professional relationship with someone who'd abandoned her. "I'll think about it," she said. 2 weeks later, she accepted. Not for Wade, but for herself. She'd rebuilt her career once. She could do it again. She started taking clients, small projects at first, a renovation here, a modest home there. Her reputation slowly recovered as the truth of Grant's fraud became widely known. Clients who'd abandoned her returned with apologies. She accepted some, declined others. Dr. Beth Winters became more than Claire's doctor. She became her friend. They had coffee every Sunday, often with Lily in a carrier. They didn't talk about the past one. The trauma was too recent, too raw. Instead, they talked about the future. "What will you tell Lily when she's older?" Dr. Winters asked one Sunday. "About her father. The truth that some people seem good on the surface but are dangerous underneath. That she should trust her instincts. That strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just refusing to give up. That's wisdom she'll need." On Lily's first birthday, Claire threw a small party at her new house. Nora came, bringing Grace. Dr. Winters came with her partner. A few new friends from Connecticut came. Wade sent a gift but didn't attend, respecting Claire's boundaries. They sang happy birthday. Lily smashed cake into her hair, delighted by the mess. Grace helped her open presents, patient with the baby's grabbing hands. After everyone left, Claire held Lily on the porch swing, watching the sunset. Her daughter's eyes were drooping, exhausted from excitement. "I want to tell you something," Claire whispered. "Something I want you to remember when you're older. Your father tried to destroy me. He tried to take you away, to make me disappear the way he made your sister's mother disappear. But I fought back. Not because I'm special or strong, but because you were worth fighting for. You are worth everything." Lily yawned, not understanding the words but soothed by the tone. "There will be times when people try to make you feel small," Claire continued. "When they take credit for your work or dismiss your achievements or tell you that you don't matter. When that happens, remember this. You came from a woman who survived the worst someone could do to her. You carry that strength in your DNA." That night, after putting Lily to bed, Claire opened her laptop. She hadn't designed anything new since before her arrest, had only worked on others' projects. But tonight she felt ready. She opened a blank file and began to sketch. Not a house for a client, a house for herself, for Lily and Grace. A home that represented everything she'd learned. Strong foundation, open spaces, natural light flooding every room, no dark corners where secrets could hide. She worked until dawn, lost in creation, and realized she was smiling. 2 years after Grant's conviction, Claire stood at a podium in Boston, addressing the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. The ballroom held 300 people, mostly survivors and advocates. Some had been through experiences like hers. Many had been through worse. "My name is Claire Brennan," she began. 2 years ago, I was in prison, charged with crimes I didn't commit. separated from my newborn daughter. My husband had stolen everything I'd built, destroyed my reputation, and framed me for his first wife's murder. I thought my life was over. She paused, letting the words settle. But I'm standing here today because of three women who refused to let him win. Dr. Beth Winters, who kept evidence for 5 years waiting for the chance to use it. Nora Brennan, who chose truth over loyalty to her son. And Jessica Brennan, who left behind a journal that spoke for her even after death. Dr. Bont Winters sat in the front row, beaming. Nora sat beside her, Grace on one side, Lily on the other. The now 14-year-old held her baby sister's hand, protective and gentle. I want to talk about a specific type of abuse that often goes unrecognized, Claire continued. Financial abuse. My husband didn't hit me. He didn't leave visible bruises. Instead, he systematically transferred my assets to his name, forged my signatures, and built a legal case claiming I was mentally incompetent. By the time I understood what was happening, I had nothing. No money for lawyers, no access to my own work, no credibility. The audience was silent, intent. Financial abuse is insidious because it's legal until it's not. A husband can be on joint bank accounts, can have power of attorney, can control household finances. The line between normal marital financial management and abuse is blurry until suddenly it's very clear. And by then you're trapped. She shared statistics. 1 in 4 women experience financial abuse. Victims stay in abusive relationships an average of 7 years longer when they lack financial resources. Financial abuse is present in 98% of domestic violence cases. So what do we do about it? Claire asked. First, we believe victims. When a woman says her husband has taken her money, we don't assume she's confused or exaggerating. We investigate. Second, we change laws to make this type of fraud easier to prosecute. Third, we educate people about the warning signs. She listed them: joint accounts that suddenly become restricted, credit cards that are canceled without explanation, being questioned about every purchase, having work income deposited into accounts you can't access, being discouraged from working or maintaining separate finances. But here's what I really want you to understand, Claire said, leaning into the microphone. If you're in this situation right now, if you're watching your money disappear, if you're being told you're crazy or incompetent, listen to me, you're not. Your instincts are right, or wrong, and there is a way out. She detailed resources, hotlines, legal aid organizations, financial planning services for abuse survivors, safe ways to document evidence, steps for protecting yourself while planning to leave. My case had a relatively happy ending, she said, but I know many don't. Jessica Brennan didn't survive. Other women in this room have lost children, lost years of their lives, lost opportunities that can never be recovered. The system failed us. It's still failing people. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience. So we have to fix it. We have to demand better. We have to speak up, support each other, and refuse to be silent. Claire's voice strengthened. My husband tried to drown me twice. Once in a pool, as spectacle, once in lies, as strategy. But I'm still here, and so are you. We survived. That means something. The applause started slowly, then built to a standing ovation. Claire stepped away from the podium and was immediately surrounded by survivors wanting to share their stories, to thank her, to feel less alone. She hugged them, listened to them, gave them her email address, and promised to stay in touch. Later, at dinner with Dr. Winters and Nora, Claire felt the weight of the day settle over her. Speaking was exhausting. Reliving trauma, even to help others, took a toll. You did good today, Dr. Winters said. I did what I had to do. Someone else might need to hear that they're not crazy, that they're not alone. You've become an advocate. That's powerful. Claire thought about that. She'd never wanted to be a public figure, a survivor with a capital S. She'd wanted to be an architect, design beautiful buildings, live quietly, but life had other plans. I got a call yesterday, she said, from Jessica's parents. They want to meet Grace. They haven't seen her since she was 5 months old. Nora's expression clouded. What did you tell them? That I'd ask Grace? It's her choice. Grace had been listening from across the table, pretending to focus on her pasta. Now she looked up. I want to meet them. I want to know about my mom from people who loved her. Then we'll arrange it, Claire said. 2 weeks later, they all gathered at Nora's house. Jessica's parents, Helen and Robert Jackson, arrived with photograph albums and stories. They told Grace about her mother's childhood, her love of art, her kindness. She would be so proud of you, Helen said, touching Grace's cheek. You look just like her, Grace cried. So did Helen. Robert pulled them both into a hug while Claire held Lily and gave them space to grieve and reconnect. That night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet, Grace came to Claire's room. Claire had stayed over at Nora's, too tired to drive home. Can I ask you something, Grace said. Always. Are you going to adopt me legally? I mean, so you'd be my real mom? Claire's throat tightened. Do you want that? I think so. I know Nora is my guardian, and that's good. But you're Lily's mom, and I want us to be real sisters. Not just half-sisters. You're already real sisters. Biology doesn't determine that. Love does. But legally, if it's what you want and what Nora agrees to, then yes, I would be honored to be your mother, legally and every other way. Grace nodded, satisfied. Okay, good, because I need you to sign this permission slip for a field trip, and it says parent or guardian, and I wanted to put parent. Claire laughed through tears. Give it here. She signed the form, and Grace left to go to bed. Claire sat alone in the guest room, looking at the form. Parent signature. She'd lost so much. Her marriage, years of her life, her sense of safety, her trust in people. But she'd gained something too. 2 daughters who needed her, a purpose beyond herself, the knowledge that she could survive anything. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Saw your speech online, Isafe. Thank you for sharing your story. You helped me realize I'm not crazy. I'm leaving tomorrow. My sister is helping me. Thank you. Claire typed back, you're brave. You're strong. You're going to make it. Please stay safe. She put the phone down and went to check on Lily, who slept peacefully in her travel crib. Her daughter's chest rose and fell steadily. Tiny fists curled beside her face. We made it, Claire whispered. Against everything. We made it through. She thought about Grant in prison, about Tessa serving her sentence, about the empire they'd built on stolen work and broken women. All of it was gone now. Dust. But Claire's design still existed. The building she'd created still stood, sheltering families, providing homes. They couldn't take that away. They'd tried to claim credit, but the truth was documented now, preserved, protected. 3 years ago, she'd been the desperate wife clinging to a sinking marriage. 2 years ago, she'd been the prisoner without hope. 1 year ago, she'd been the woman learning to rebuild. Today, she was simply Claire, architect, mother, survivor. Tomorrow, she'd wake up and design something beautiful. She'd play with her daughters. She'd answer emails from other survivors seeking guidance. She'd live her life fully, freely, without fear. That was the best revenge. Not Grant's imprisonment or Tessa's disgrace or the public acknowledgement of her innocence. The best revenge was building a life so beautiful, so meaningful, so full of love, that their attempts to destroy her became nothing more than a temporary interruption in a story that was always hers to write. Claire kissed her sleeping daughter's forehead and whispered the words that had become her mantra. We survived. That means something. And it did. It meant everything.